Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you may have forgotten about from Baldur's Gate. I'm going back to some of these oldish sets, not older sets. These are all sets that have existed since my channel has existed. But of course, because we get so much Commander content now, it is tough to keep track of all of this stuff. I'm going back and looking at some of these, older but also newer sets. Again, the time frame of about the last 4 years or so, and I'm digging into some of the less popular cards to give them a little bit more attention. And this time I will be talking specifically about Baldur's Gate, which of course was an actual Commander set. Let's start out with Green Slime. 2 and a green ooze, 2/2 with Flash. When Green Slime enters the battlefield, counter target activated or triggered ability from an artifact or enchantment source. If a permanent's ability is countered this way, destroy that permanent, and it has foretell 1 green. I really like this card a lot. I'm a big fan of countering activated and triggered abilities. I think that is an underrated thing to do in a Commander game in general. There's always going to be stuff like that happening all the time. Of course, you can foretell this, and then for only 1 green mana, you can flash it out. And not only are you going to counter that activated or triggered ability, you might actually destroy that permanent and you'll have a 2/2 body on the field as well. I know a lot of people say, okay, well, I just use my Nature's Claim. Yes, but Nature's Claim doesn't work with everything. If your opponent already has an Aetherflux Reservoir on the battlefield, they'll just kill you in response to your Nature's Claim, right? There's a lot of situations like that are similar. Green Slime will be much better in a situation like that. I think this is a great card. Mocking Doppelganger is one that I actually talked about when Baldur's Gate first came out, but doesn't see a whole lot of play. 3 and a blue shapeshifter. Again with the flash, you may have Mocking Doppelganger enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature an opponent controls, except it has other creatures with the same name as this creature are goated. Man, this seems like maybe one of the best clones out there. Of course, this is a pretty blatant example of power creep. Of course, the original clone is exactly this casting cost, 3 and a blue. And then, of course, we have Stunt Double, which is power crept clone, which is 3 and a blue, but it also has flash. And then we have a more power crept version of that, which of course is Mocking Doppelganger, which is 3 and a blue and has the flash. And then also this ability. This is really a powerful effect in a Commander game, I think, because of course, not only are you going to keep the scariest creature on board from attacking you, but now you also get a copy of the most scariest creature on board, right? I know Blightsteel Colossus might be a bit of an overused example here, but it is the best example. My opponent has one, I flash this in, now I have a Blightsteel Colossus and theirs is goated. So essentially, I'm going to use their Blightsteel Colossus to kill the other opponents, and I'm going to use mine to kill them. It really can be almost a game-ending scenario in some situations. Really good clone effect, I think. Crystal Dragon is a really interesting card. It's an adventure card, and the adventure part is the part that I like. And in fact, I find with most adventure cards, usually the adventure side is the side that you want to be putting in your deck, and the creature side is sort of just the added bonus, and that is certainly the case here. This is a very unique card, I think, and that's why I'm giving it a mention. So Rob the Horde is 1 and a white sorcery. Return target artifact, enchantment, or legendary card from your graveyard to your hand. And that's very significant, I think, because of course, if this was a green card, I wouldn't be talking about it, but it's a white card and there isn't a ton of options for stuff like this. We can get low mana value stuff out of our graveyard to the battlefield with white effects a lot, but this is very unique in what it's doing, in particular, the legendary card part, which is a pretty easy include in any deck where you're doing sort of the legendary tribal thing, which I can think of a few commanders in white that are doing that. This even is just have my commander go to the graveyard instead of command zone and then just get it back out of the graveyard. But also I can use it to get an artifact out of the graveyard, an enchantment out of the graveyard, right? It is just a pretty unique effect in white. And then later in the game, of course, this is sitting in exile and I can just cast it for 4 white and get a dragon with flying and vigilance into play. That's a 4/4, which is not going to scare anybody away, but of course it is a decent blocker. It's a decent attacker. Later in the game, that can be very relevant. So maybe give it a shot in one of your decks. Mirror of Life Trapping is such a unique card and really doesn't see much play at all. 4 mana artifact. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it was cast, exile it, then return all other permanent cards exiled with Mirror of Life Trapping to the battlefield under their owner's control. This is such a unique effect, and there's a lot of really neat things that you can do do with it. I think the most obvious way to use this card is in a blinking strategy or any sort of ETB strategy, right? Because of course, if I have a Reclamation Sage, it's going to come down, and when that creature enters the battlefield, I cast it, so I'm going to exile it, but I'm also getting the trigger off of my Reclamation Sage, so I still can destroy an artifact or enchantment. Then my Reclamation Sage gets exiled, and then when anyone else casts a creature spell, my Reclamation Sage is then going to come back into play, and I get to destroy something else, right? So I basically get a double use. It's almost like a panharmonicon effect in an ETB deck. It also probably has a lot of other unique effects as well. Maybe you just want your opponent's creatures to be entering the battlefield all the time, right? There is that effect as well. If I got a Soul Warden in play, I'll be gaining double life essentially. If I have a Bloodseeker in play, my opponents will be losing double life, right? So I think there's a lot of interesting ways to use this card, and I'm surprised it really doesn't see that much play in the format. Next up at number 5, Marut. 8 mana artifact creature construct, 7/7 with trample. When Marut enters the battlefield, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it, create a treasure token for each mana from a treasure spent to cast it. So this is a pretty unique card. I know it doesn't look like much, but I will say a 7/7 trampler, even in the commander format, is pretty darn good. That is a menacing creature for sure. This card is pretty darn unique, and I'm actually shocked it doesn't see more play. 8 mana I know sounds a lot, but it is essentially free if you use treasure. Of course, if I have 8 treasure in play, and if I'm in a treasure deck, that's not very hard to do, right? How hard is it to get 8 treasure in your treasure deck? You use the 8 treasure to cast this guy, and then you create 8 treasure. And then, of course, you end up getting a 7/7 trampler for free. On top of that, you were also creating the treasure again, right? And maybe you're getting token creation or artifact enter the battlefield triggers or something like that. So it's a way to get more triggers off of what you might be doing in your deck already, right? Maybe I have a Reckless Fireweaver in my treasure deck. Now I can sacrifice a bunch of my treasures. Maybe it's not 8, maybe it's only 5, but I sacrifice 5 of them to help cast my Marut. I get it out and I get 5 more treasures and get a bunch of triggers off of my Reckless Fireweaver, right? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So not only is it likely going to be an almost free big creature in your treasure deck, but it also might be getting you a whole bunch of triggers off of other effects as well. Let's talk about Sculpted Sunburst. This is definitely a card that I never talked about before on my channel. Of course, Baldur's Gate had a lot of really great cards, so that's another reason why I like to do this. Go back, dig down deep into some of these cards that don't see much play, and let's shine some light on them. 3 white sorcery, choose a creature you control, then each opponent chooses a creature they control with equal or lesser power. If you choose a creature this way, exile each creature not chosen by any player this way. So of course, we do have effects like this, and of course, we do have an absolute ton of great white board wipes in the format, but of course, this is doing something specific, and I just talked about in a video how we gotta be playing those board wipes that are advantaging us, because of course, every game you're gonna be seeing a Teferi's Protection or a Heroic Intervention, and this is going to advantage you to not give that guy who casted Teferi's Protection such a big advantage, and of course, because it's exiling, the guy with the Heroic Intervention isn't gonna be doing anything at all, so that is another reason to be playing a card like this. Obviously, because we get the choice here, we get to control the outcome. We're going to choose a creature likely with a low power, so our opponents will also have to choose a creature with equal or lesser power. We have effects like this in the commander format already, and weirdly enough, this is kind of doing a combination of 2 popular board wipes in the format. Fell the Mighty, which is doing the, destroy all those big powered creatures thing, and also Divine Reckoning, which is each player gets to choose a creature and you destroy the rest. So it is kind of combining these 2 board wipes into one, but on top of that, it's also exiling, right? These 2 guys are destroy. Sculpted Sunburst is in exile, which I think is very relevant. Again, the board wipes that only just destroy are getting worse and worse and worse because of all the indestructible floating around, right? So I think this is a pretty underrated board wipe in the format. Let's talk about Vrock, a card that I put in a deck recently. 3 black, bird demon, 3/3 with flying. Beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, each opponent loses 3 life. That's it. Very simple. All you have to do is just have something have left the battlefield that revolt trigger, right? And each opponent is just going to lose 3 life. I mean, that seems pretty good in a lot of different situations, in particular where you're building around the strategy of having things leave the battlefield, like in your Saravok deck or your Minthara deck, 2 commanders that want that to be happening every turn and also are in black. But also, of course, any deck where you're just sacrificing creatures, again, the treasure token theme, it's very easy to have a permanent leaving the battlefield. Just having your opponents lose 3 life every single one of your end steps seems pretty good. Cloakwood Swarmkeeper is definitely a card that needs to have a light shone on it, in my opinion, because of, again, we're getting more and more of certain strategies in the commander format with particular commanders, and this one definitely needs some more attention. 1 green mana Elf Ranger 1/1. Whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Cloakwood Swarmkeeper. So I will first point out this is an elf. So man, it seems like any elf tribal deck, usually you are cranking out elf tokens in those decks. So this guy seems like a pretty easy slot in there, but of course any token theme. And there's an absolute ton of decks out there that are making tokens. Again, even a treasure deck is making tokens. This is any kind of token. There are so many popular token themes in the format now, and this guy's a pretty easy slot in. I know he's just a big vanilla creature, but he is a big vanilla creature for only 1 mana, right? You could drop this guy down on turn 1, and he just sits there getting bigger and bigger and bigger and becoming a menacing threat. Probably this card can go in a lot more decks than it's in. How about Ghastly Death Tyrant? This is a very interesting one. 4 black, Beholder Skeleton 6/5. When it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Destroy target enchantment and opponent controls. You lose life equal to its mana value. Creatures you control gain death touch until end of turn. So of course, giving your creatures death touch until end of turn, that's okay. And I guess you could put this in a deck where maybe you want to be attacking a lot, but I got to give this card a mention because it is just a black card that destroys an enchantment. That's it. And of course, that is incredibly rare in mono black. So you might want to throw this in your deck just for that reason alone. Just my opponents play all these powerful enchantments. And of course, there's lots of powerful enchantments in the format. And of course, black decks and probably Rakdos decks and Dimir decks, right? Anywhere in the Grixis part of the color pie, you're going to have trouble dealing with enchantments, and it might be worth it to put this guy in there. I know 6 mana seems like a lot to destroy an enchantment, but you are getting a 6/5 body as well. And again, recursion, blinking, all of that stuff works here because this is stapled on a creature. So this is a very unique card, and I think it deserves a little more attention. I'm going to end off with Call to the Void. This is a funny card, and it's not super great, but I think it is a pretty interesting board wipe into the commander format. So 4 and a black sorcery, each player secretly chooses a creature they control and a creature they don't control. Then those choices are revealed. Destroy each creature chosen this way. This is a very unpopular card in the commander format. I'm sure most people have never even seen it before. I think it's a really funny, interesting board wipe. It's certainly not the best, but it's a fun one, right? Each player is going to choose a creature of theirs and a creature of someone else's. And of course, because it's one of these secret choosing cards, that means you don't know what anyone else is choosing. So you can maximize value here by not choosing the things that you think other people are going to choose, right? If there's a Vorinclex on the table, well, obviously someone's going to pick that, right? So you don't pick the Vorinclex, you pick another creature that you want to get destroyed because you know the next guy, he's going to pick the Vorinclex. So you can get more value out of it, right? Got to pick a creature I control? Well, I'm going to pick the creature that everyone else is going to pick, right? I know the creature that everyone else wants off my table, so I pick that one. I know it's a risk. Obviously, you don't know what your opponents are going to choose. I think it's just an interesting card in a commander game. It can be really fun to cast a card like this in a commander game and just see what the outcome is going to be. I think it's a neat card and deserves a little more love. That is it for today, though. 10 cards from Baldur's Gate that you probably either have forgotten about or have actually never even seen before. Again, we get all these cards so frequently, especially in commander sets like this, that the stuff at the top is so focused on that the rest of the cards sort of get buried and we don't really see them. So give some of these cards consideration for your decks going forward. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.